Moving our way to the front of the vehicle, we'll go over the front details that are found on the front armor plate. Starting with the bow M1919A4. This machine gun here is the resin upgrade kit from panzerwerk.com. It's highly recommended for all American tanks, including Stuarts and Shermans. The tarpaulin mount that you see here is like that on all American tanks, namely the M4 Sherman, where you have little snaps and the canvas bag would then clip onto the bow machine gun to prevent the gun and the ball mount from exposed to moisture. On the Sherman, it's this large little loop that goes around the machine gun well. On the M26 Pershing, however, it's cylindrical in appearance with its little locking tabs soldered or welded to the rim. Moving our way to the headlights. The headlights are your typical US AFV headlights. The headlights themselves are offered and set on eastcoastarmory.com, but on the M26 Pershing are featured on this unique little base which elevates them out of the hull. This base here is a resin edition and is also found on eastcoastarmory.com. The bases are hollow, and the headlight mounts to the base via this little vise type lock, and the wire then emerges from the bottom of the headlight and goes into the hull via that small little hole in the middle of the weld over there on the bracket. This is present on both sides. The piece is not actually symmetrical. It does affix to the fender, giving it some more support. On the other side, it's a lot shorter. However, it's still hollow and still functions exactly the same. Another difference between the two is that the version on this side has a small little connecting bracket that connects the headlight post directly to the bow machine gun blister that we have here. The headlight brush guard is also somewhat different on the M26 than on the other contemporary tanks such as the Sherman. It has a similar shape and appearance and functions the same. The only difference is that it welds to the side of this base extender, and then gets bolted to the sheet metal fender. What's also unique about the headlight brush guards is that they have like a support brace that also fastens to the headlight mount, but their plunger cup is mounted on the inside portion of the headlight base instead of the outside. If we recall, all American tanks have a little canister that is usually fixed to the outside of the base, where there is a small little chain retained plunger. The purpose of this chain retained plunger is that when the headlight is not in use, you pull it out of this storage container and you slip it into the headlight hole. Normally on American tanks, what that does is that seals off the hole and prevents moisture from getting inside of the vehicle. However, on the M26 Pershing, since everything is exposed, the headlight plunger isn't necessarily needed, however, is still found on the headlight. This is present on both sides of the vehicle. Also, one thing that's also unique about the M26 Pershing, how it has a Tarpaulin Snap point affixed to the top portion of the brush guard. This is also a unique feature only found on the M26 Pershing. Just like with the rear portion of the vehicle, the toe shackle mounts are both thick and thin, and there's a small little chain retained hook that would be there to, if the mounting rods were installed, they are chain retained to prevent them from getting lost. Moving our way to the blower, the M26 is unique that it has this large blister molded or casted into the front armor plate, and this here would be for the air blower and for the air intake. On the Sherman, like on the early Shermans, they would be on either side of the hull, and on the later version of the Sherman, their blower was affixed in between the two driver hatches. This was carried over into the M26 Pershing, only it was an integrally cast unit as opposed to the flush cast unit with that sheet metal brush guard that would have been fixed to it. On the M26, it was integral into the armor, and we could see the air intake holes, which would be slits, and they're fixed on either side of the blister. Also, because this is a T26E3, it received a larger blister. As the Pershing production went on, this unit not only became smaller, but also on the M26A1 was a square, flat, rectangular, or square piece, and that was also integrally cast into the plate, but it wasn't rounded or blistered like we see here on the T26. Another feature of that distinguishes this tank is a T26E3 as opposed to a M26 or an M26A1 are the extra periscopes which are fitted here on the hull. This was originally intended for production, however, after the first production batch, subsequent production batches had these two periscopes removed and a single plate that would have been welded in that location. Moving our way to the bow hatches. Pow hatches are a resin casting and are also listed on the EastCoastArmory.com product line. What's unique about the M26 hatches is that they are also torsion bar equipped. It would be your torsion bar, and it is fixed to the tank over here. The piece then runs along the body, and the hatches have their little hinges on them. Everything is fully functional, including the hatch retaining latch, which would mount to this little clip over here. Make sure the turret's out of the way to open up the hatch. And there's the hatch in the open state. These hatches are identical to the ones that would have been used on the M46 patent, as well as the M47 patent. They have their headrests over here. The periscope is the resin periscope from panzerwork.com. This would have been your hatch latch and would both serves as a handle to operate the hatch, as well as it locks it in place via this large locking bolt here, like the one found on a safe. This bronze little handle is actually connected to the hatch retaining latch, and it is fully functional in that it operates, and I could actually lock the hatches to the model via the little bronze painted hatch latch that we have here. The detail is symmetrical and is found on both hatches, and both hatches have the exact same functionality to them. Even though this model does have functional hatches, there is no interior to the model, and this is seen throughout the rest of the vehicle. Moving our way to the side of the fender, we have here the Siren. The Siren is the EastCoastArmory.com resin version and is found on the ECA product line. However, it is in this M26 style brush guard. This brush guard is common on later generation American tanks, such as the M26, as well as even the T28 Super Heavy tank. Moving our way back, we have here the tank's fire extinguisher. All American tanks have a fire extinguisher mounted externally. On the Sherman, it would have been behind the turret, and on the Stuart, would have been on the side of the hull. What's unique about the fire extinguisher mount is that this is the single-handled version, and this fire extinguisher mount is the identical, same exact version that's found on the M5 Stuarts. In fact, this version here that's listed on the EastCoastArmory.com product line can be found on both the M26 and M5 Stuart tank pages. The fire extinguisher handle is painted red, as per the real vehicle. Moving our way back, we can now really appreciate the top casting of the model. If we notice, the sides here actually blister outward for the turret ring. This is as per the real vehicle. And also what's unique is that the front portion of the Pershing is not a square box, but it actually V's upward. This was built into the model and was all scratch built out of wood, epoxies, and fiberglass. The little V channel also creates a little notch and channel for the hatch mount as well as the hatch torsion bar. On the rear quarter here, we'll start getting into the splash rim with the gutter. The gutter is also found around here, and it bleeds off into the fender work. And the whole point of the gutter is that it prevents water from pooling up in these areas over here. Moving on to the gas caps, we'll see that the gas caps are chain retained, and like on all of my American tanks, are fully functional. You open them up and you have the fuel filler cap underneath. Also, if we notice, all the fluids are identified and are properly labeled. This one here is for gasoline, as well as this one. All the caps are fully functional, and this one here is for water. This would be for your radiators, and it's fully functional as well. Moving our way to the engine grills. The engine grills are all fabricated out of brass strip and brass rod, and are all soldered together. They are also fully functional. If I open it up, it hinges open. However, there is no engine compartment or detail on the inside. It just hinges upward in case I want to display the engine grills in an open state for a maintenance diorama. The rear grille is also fully functional. It is also comprised of 4 separate pieces and lift up just like they would on the real tank. These again are all fabricated out of brass and are all soldered together assembly. Moving on to the turrets. The turret is all scratch built like the rest of the model, and has all of its blister detail and armor detail all casted in, as well as all of its cast texture. Another feature that distinguishes this tank is a T26E3, are the small little engine lift removal nubs that are added to the side of the turret. A lot of people are unaware, but the purpose of these 2 little mounts is for engine removal. The turret would rotate in this location over here, and when the turret is perpendicular to the engine bay, the grills would be opened, the center plate would be removed, and a harness would then be affixed to the removal tools, and that will aid in pulling the engine out of the engine bay. If we notice on the one towards the front of the vehicle, it has to be on a small little extender plate to counter that of the curvature of the turret hull. The little extender also has a hole drilled into it to help prevent water from pooling up. The turret is very detailed and has a lot of specialty features that only found on the M26 Pershing, such as the track rack, which is mounted to the side of the turret. The rack itself is all fabricated out of sheet metal, and it is an exact copy of the real one, which is found on the real tanks. The way the rack is functional is that the length of track locks onto these 2 little tabs, and then is retained to the rack via this small plate, which then fastens to the rack. The rack itself has a small little clip which replicates that of the guide tooth, so that when fitting the track to the rack, everything fits in, as the timing is pretty much perfect. Also stowed on the external portion of the tank is the track jack. These track jacks are removable and lock onto the tank in a realistic manner. Purposes of these jacks is so that when putting on the track, one portion of the tooth fits on to this hook and another portion of the tooth fit on the other hook, and via this ratchet here, you would then ratchet the track together so it's tight enough for you to put on the end cap. While we're on the track that this model uses is the steel chevron type. The M26 Pershing utilized 3 types of track. You have the single pin all steel track, which is reminiscent of the T26 steel track that's used on the HVSS Shermans. You also have the rubber chevron style track, which is more or less a post-World War II incarnation, in that they wanted to drive on the European roads without destroying them. And then this version here was this steel chevron type. The steel chevron type, even though the external part of the track was steel, the internal portion of the track was rubber padded, so that it mates well with the rubber road wheels on the suspension. Here's the track. on the model. This track here is fully linked together. It's all casted out of resin with steel pins and is found on the EastCoastArmory.com product line. These tracks are identical to the tracks found on HVSS Shermans with the exception of the center tooth. On the M26 Pershing, the tooth was a tooth, while on the HVSS Sherman, the tooth was a large hollow box. Like all American tanks, the Pershing had an ejection port located on the left-hand side of the turret. The hatch is fully functional and features all of its interior detailing as well as the pulling lever. That lever would be used to open and close the hatch without having to expose your arm. Even the bushing detail of the hatch is fitted. The hatch itself is a component that's listed on the EastCoastArmory.com product line. On the opposite side of the turret, we have here the storage rack, which would have been used for crew equipment, but also for the foul weather driving hoods. They would be stowed in this location here and would be retained via straps via these metal footman loops. The entire rack that you see here is all fabricated out of metal and is all soldered together. On the rear portion here of the turret, we have another track ratchet jack, which I explained how it works in a previous scene. And moving our way to the rear plate, we have, like on all most American tanks, the machine gun storage equipment. These two angles here would be for mounting the barrel of the M2HB heavy machine gun. The center storage panel would be for mounting the cradle into this location, which a lever, which appears to have broken off during storage, would have been used to clamp the gun to the panel. On this portion here of the turret is the barrel clamp, which would clamp onto the ventilation shroud of the M2, and then a small spring-retained lever would go ahead and keep everything together while it's in the storage mode. Moving our way to the mantlet, it is all fabricated out of plastic and with lots of bodywork to give it the cast look, as well as its casting numbers. The barrel itself is all turned out of PVC and has its proper taper to it. The muzzle currently has a muzzle bag on it. The muzzle bag itself is found on the EastCoastArmory.com product line and is listed in the German armor section. However, this green color closely resembles that which was used on American tanks, and it has no problem fitting over my M26 gun muzzle. In addition to the muzzle bag, the gun muzzle itself is also found on the EastCoastArmory.com product line. This muzzle is designed for both M26 as well as M36 jacks in use. M26, the T26E3, featured this double baffle muzzle brake for its 90mm gun. Later on during the M26 production run, when the M26 was moved up to M26A1 specification, the gun was changed in that a large bore evacuator was mounted to this portion here of the front of the barrel, and the double baffle design was changed to a single baffle design, which literally was the double baffle with the external baffle cut off. The gun looks something like that. The turret can fully transverse and the barrel can go up and down. The barrel is spring retained to prevent the barrel from drooping. As you can see, I could position the barrel in just about any position and it will stay put. The mantlet turret lock is installed and is fastened to the vehicle, just like on the real one, and serves the same function. Moving our way to the top of the turret, we have here our typical American tank details, such as the oval loader's hatch, which is fully functional and opens up. This hatch is identical to the ones used on Shermans, and all these components that you see on top of this tank are listed on the EastCoastArmory.com product line, including the brass periscope guard, the oval loader's hatch, the pivotable searchlight with retention cap, the vane sight, the small periscope here, the MP48 spring antenna bases, which are really spring bound, the retracting M2 50 caliber gun mount. This gun mount actually retracts, and that if you remove these 4 bolts, the travel lock would fold down in its stowed position, upon which on the real tank a belt would then go ahead and keep the unit in the stowed position. Finally, the late war Commander's Copula single hatch is also found on the M26, as well as the EastCoastArmory.com product line. The hatch, it has its full detailing, including its internal periscopes. Now, as of note, on the real single hatch copula, this portion here of the hatch can rotate 360 degrees, and this graduated gauge here would tell you exactly what your orientation is via that little triangle there. This is the part that would rotate and would spin around. Another part that's listed on the ECA product line is the 50 caliber travel lock. The travel lock here is foldable, and its intent is to prevent the gun from swinging around when in transport mode. Usually when the gun is up here, it is not stowed in the travel rack, which we have here on the rear portion of the vehicle. For the 50 caliber itself, it is affixed to an Armor Pack's white metal M23 Cradle mount, which is a very highly recommended component and is very nicely detailed and is fully functional. It's all composed out of white metal, and I've used this mount several times in the past. As for the 50 caliber itself, this is the Dragon plastic M2 HB 50 caliber kit. The kit itself is probably the best rendition of a M2 HB on the 1/6 scale market, and is highly recommended. And that concludes this model showcase video for this 1/6 scale M26 T26E3 Pershing. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook. And also, don't forget to check out EastCoastArmory.com for more 1/6 scale tank builds, as well as other 1/6 scale detail components. Thank you.